Okay, so I've just been looking at the Green Party's policy page. This was last revised in March 2015, first revised January 1990. This is referring to the Green Party of England and Wales. Now, a few things I want to say before reading some of this out. Um, I am not a supporter of the Greens, and I don't think I ever will be. It's not that I'm against everything they stand for. I do believe the environment and environmental issues are important. But there is so many of their policies, certainly too many to go over in one video, that I feel are just so incredibly naive that it doesn't even warrant consideration. I'm not talking about green issues, actually, I'm talking about other things. Their attitude to immigration, their attitude to so many bread and butter issues that people care about is just so out there and so, um, in my opinion, reckless that I hope they never get anywhere near government because I won't say far left, but certainly loony left fits into the bill as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to read out their attitude to crime and justice because that is something I feel very strongly about. Now, it is notable that on the Facebook page, they pretty much never have an article dealing with crime and justice. And yet, this is a very important issue that affects many, many, many people and which many people feel strongly about. So I'm going to read this out first, then I'm going to break it down a bit as to why I take issue with this and why I believe they're not just reckless, they are, I don't want to say immoral because that gives a kind of religious connotation, but just wrong. Okay, so I'm going to read this out, and this isn't some sort of, right wing tabloid source. This is directly from their own party website. Like I say, last updated March 2015. CJ 100, this is their amendment points, I guess. Background. The term crime covers many different categories and types of acts or omissions. Most crimes cause or threaten harm to individuals, groups, the community, other species, or the environment. Crimes are currently defined by legislation which gives the courts power to impose sanctions on people convicted of committing them. CJ 101. Crime arises from a combination of individual and social factors. The level and types of crime are related to the sort of society we create. Green policies are directed to improve the quality as opposed to simply the material wealth of our society and ensuring a just distribution of that wealth and quality of life. CJ 102. Current approaches to imposing sanctions are a confused amalgam of conflicting principles, deterrence and punishment mixed with compensation and rehabilitation. This confusion undermines the potential for success of the positive aspects of the present system. Okay, I'm going to deal with that first before going on to the other points. That's not a contradiction. If anything, there is a contradiction in saying that other parties only talk tough when they have just said themselves in this point that there is a situation of compensation and rehabilitation. So that contradicts what the left and the Green Party very often claim, that those who take a more right wing conservative approach to this are only interested in punishment. They've just said current approaches to imposing sanctions are a confused amalgam of conflicting principles. It's not conflicting because both are necessary. Um, so I'm going to go on to their section on principles. CJ 110. Given that crime should be seen as partly caused by social factors, it cannot be adequately addressed solely in terms of criminal justice and policing policy. A green approach to crime reduction therefore places significant focus on the social causes of crime. As well as social crime prevention, this includes a broader range of social policies which will lessen the social pressures such as poverty, inequality, or addiction to illegal drugs to commit crime. Okay, I'm going to take this point by point, that'll be easier. Okay, I think most people would agree that you need to tackle root causes. I don't take issue with that. What I do take issue with is by using it solely as an excuse, which is what the Greens are doing. They're basically saying if you're poor and you commit crime, that's a legitimate excuse. They're basically using this as a way to knock off the justice aspect. And I think that's absurd. Number one, this slanders every working class person as being a potential criminal because they come from a poorer background. And it ignores the fact that there are many people who come from a poor background who don't commit crime. So I think it's problematic just making this sweeping statement, oh, it's all to do with poverty, it's all to do with social factors. Absolutely, there are issues there. You'd be pretty stupid to say that if someone is growing up in a household where, I don't know, the father is a drug dealer and the mother is a prostitute, that person is not going to be influenced by that. Of course they are. If someone who grows up in an abusive home, there's a strong chance they're going to be negatively influenced. So, of course, those things need to be tackled. But that is not the issue I take. The issue I take is they're saying that should be the significant focus. And it's assuming this sort of utopian idea that if you just solve that, then crime will go away. There are examples of people from better backgrounds committing crime. Quite a few examples, actually. So, where does the poverty argument come into that? When you get middle and upper class jobs, CJ111. The lives and liberties of individuals, groups, and society as a whole must be protected within a law based system. Strive for justice, including social and economic justice and fairness. We therefore believe that it is necessary for society to define certain forms of harmful behaviour as crimes, but that the list of crimes should be kept as short as possible. Again, this is typical green thinking, just nice and rosy and oh, let's all get on with each other. The fact of the matter is, there are a lot of crimes that damage individual people, and that's unfortunate. But you can't just have wishful thinking and say, we believe that the list of crimes should be kept as short as possible. If there are crimes that damage the individual, that threaten someone else's liberty, then yes, they should be classed as crimes. I don't know what the Greens propose by making this short list. That to me indicates a reckless approach of knocking off so called trivial crimes because they're perceived to be not as bad. But one issue I've always been quite firm about is that just because a crime doesn't involve violence doesn't mean it's not harmful. Most crimes are harmful. Okay? So if you have someone who's constantly shoplifting, people might say that's harmless. But what about the long suffering shopkeeper that has to constantly replace the goods? What about the householder? Or what about anyone for that matter who's constantly having their property stolen? It may not involve violence, but it causes a great deal of stress and disruption to individual liberty. So to me, that's just utopian nonsense. The list of crimes should be kept as short as possible. CJ112. Criminal justice cannot be successfully imposed from above, but needs as far as possible to be a product of a living democratic community. The basic institutions of green justice should be community based and relatively informal in nature. They should provide maximum potential for public participation. Okay, public participation sound fair enough because the public have a say in that, although the Greens will get a nasty surprise when they realise that most members of the public want to see criminals held to account for their actions. The Greens don't. Criminal justice cannot be successfully imposed from above. Is this a political party that is stating this? That seems to me that they are not actually recognising that in a society you have judges, you have legislators, that is imposing law from above by definition. It seems to me that they're proposing some sort of anarchist society where people just make up their own, they just kind of regulate themselves. It's just yet another indicator of how reckless this party is. Community based. So, okay, there's a place for community justice, I get that, and I actually support that, but it indicates to me that they're going to make most sentencing community based, and I do not agree with that. There are certain crimes that not only violent crimes but repeat offenders need to go to jail because clearly they're not learning anything from community sentencing. CJ113. The Green approach to dealing with offenders, however, differs markedly from current practice. We believe retributive sentencing to be ineffective in reducing crime. Okay, How do they define retributive sentencing? If I get really annoyed when the left come up with this, it's this idea that if there is tough justice, that's somehow revenge. If it was really about revenge, then exactly the same thing would happen to the perpetrator as they done to the victim. In other words, if you have some mindless thug who assaults someone for absolutely no reason, it's happened to me, revenge or retributive justice, as the Greens put it, would be the victim would be allowed, they would be held there by the police officers, and the victim would be allowed to smack them. That would be retributive justice. Tough justice is not retributive justice. That's nonsense. And it really irritates me the way that they've spun this. Um, of course, it differs markedly because they don't give a damn about the victim. CJ114. We will introduce the principle of restorative justice while denouncing the crime, deals constructively with both the victim and the offender. The primary aim will be to restore and, if necessary, improve the position of the victim and the community. The offender will be required to make amends. You know, they are really gritting their teeth, even trying to have any notion of justice. They're more or less putting the victim and the offender on an equilibrium there. Um, Denouncing the crime deals whilst denouncing the crime deals constructively with both the victim and the offender. I really would like to break some of these points down and really get to what they're driving at because the Greens don't actually believe in justice. They don't believe in punishment. They believe punishment is a dirty word. So they're not really interested in criminals taking responsibility for their actions. They're just throwing that in there because they know they have to say something to avoid being seen as completely reckless. CJ115. Restorative justice recognises the need not only to ensure that the amount and nature of reparation be appropriate to the harm suffered, but also that it is within the capacity of the offender to make it. This means that any shortfall will have to be met by the community. That's perverse. That is utterly perverse. That is saying that the actions of a criminal is a responsibility of society. The decision that a criminal made to inflict suffering on the victim is the responsibility of society. Now, from a practical point of view, if someone doesn't have the means to pay, then they can't pay there and then. In my opinion, they should be punished until they can pay. That's justice. That's fair. Restorative justice recognises the need not only to ensure that the amount and nature of reparation be appropriate to the harm suffered. This shows their absolute hypocrisy because they're talking about the need to ensure proportionality if the overwhelming majority of people believe that sentencing remains far too disproportionate in favour of offenders, something the Greens have clearly completely ignored. If the Greens had their way, we would not be seeing proportionate sentencing. We would be seeing thugs being given a tap on the wrist. They're not interested in proportionality at all, or at least their definition of proportionate is that the vast majority of crimes shouldn't face serious punishment. And they've made it clear with all these points. CJ116. The symbolism of the scales of justice would be interpreted in a new way, balancing the harm done to the victim or community not by further harm inflicted on the offender, but by requiring the offender to make reparation. They're not even specifying what this reparation would mean. They talk about harm to the offender. If someone attacks an old lady, if someone rapes a defenseless woman, if someone commits arson, if someone repeatedly steals from a shop, if someone assaults a stranger for no reason, damn right they should go to prison. And should that be a pleasant experience? Hell no. The Greens have this pathetic, rosy idea that there's this equilibrium where criminals should somehow be happy. I mean, they're totally clueless. CJ116. Oh, right, I've just read that. Okay, objectives. CJ200. To reduce the amount of crime committed by some individuals against others, against the community, against other species, or against the environment, with the emphasis on persuading and enabling rather than coercion. That is nonsense. Persuading and enabling rather than coercion. So you get a mindless thug who attacks someone on the street. The Green policy is, oh son, don't do that. That's not very nice. Let's just sit down and have a cup of tea. Please don't do that. Not very nice. These people are absolutely deluded. CJ 201, to assist the victims of criminal acts as much as possible. Well, something they fail to recognise is that one way that victims need to cope is by having closure. And when you don't have justice, you can't have closure. I'm not saying that when a perpetrator is sent to jail, it makes everything better for the victim, but at least it gives some notion of justice. It might not bring the loved one back. It won't change the crime, but at least it sends a message that there is an equilibrium being put there. The Greens wouldn't have that. CJ 202, to demonstrate clearly and constructively to offenders and other members of the community that criminal acts are unacceptable. Again, I'd like to see how they would do that, because so far all they have indicated is that they would make polite suggestions to the criminal. Please don't do that. It's not very nice. CJ 203, to require reparation for crimes committed rather than punishment or retribution. Again, very vague. How do they define reparation? They've just contradicted themselves. They've said if a criminal cannot afford to make reparation, they shouldn't have to. So they've contradicted themselves. CJ 204, to heal the rifts resulting from crime in such a way as to further social integration and to integrate offenders into the community rather than outlaw them. I'm all for rehabilitation. I believe that when someone has served their sentence, they should be helped back into the community. But the point is, there has to be that sentence served. There has to be that punishment factor there. Punishment is not fickle. Punishment does serve a purpose. And they talk about this as if the criminal is the victim. That's perverse. CJ 205, to intervene as minimally as the serious of the offence and the circumstances will allow, in order to achieve the aims of CJ 202, CJ 203, and CJ 204. In other words, if someone is committing a crime but it's not violent, the Greens will basically ignore it. They'll say it's trivial, it doesn't really matter. Or maybe we'll tell them not, behave yourself. Don't be a bad boy. Don't be a bad girl. It's not very nice. Please don't do that. Oh, but we're not going to punish you because that wouldn't be putting you on equilibrium with the person that you're persecuting. CJ 206. To ensure that if an offender has to be detained, the purpose of detention is not to punish, humiliate, or degrade him, but to protect society or the offender, her himself, while maintaining her dignity and human rights. Okay, believe it or not, I do believe in human rights for inmates. Even scumbags have their human rights. But here's something the Greens are missing: the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I'm going to read this out. I've got a copy of it in poster format. Um, Let me just get to the right point. Yeah, Article 5, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Degrading treatment or punishment. It doesn't say no one shall be punished. And it says, everyone, Article 29, sorry for that pause, I was just trying to find the right point. Article 29, everyone has duties to the community. The state may only limit someone's rights to ensure respect for the rights and freedoms of others. Okay, that clearly stipulates that governments do have a moral obligation and a moral right to intervene when people are hurting others. I'll just read that again. Everyone has duties to the community. The state may only limit someone's rights to ensure respect for the rights and freedoms of others. Now, when someone commits a crime, that's precisely what people are doing. They're violating other people's liberty. So there is a moral obligation there, as laid out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Governments to intervene. The Greens conveniently ignore that. To ensure that if an offender has to be detained, the purpose of detention is not to punish, humiliate, or degrade. Okay, I agree with don't humiliate or degrade. But then again, humiliate, how do you define that? I mean, by definition, going to prison is going to be humiliating. That doesn't mean it's wrong. Degradation, human rights abuses, yeah, I agree with that. I don't want prisoners to be tortured or beaten up or a culture of bullying to exist. I do believe those issues need to be tackled. But they say the purpose of detention is not to punish. They have said it there. They are anti punishment. Now, how can they even start to claim to be about justice if they, from the pretext, from the very concept of punishment they are opposed to, that demonstrates to me their utter ignorance, their utter callousness, and their utter stupidity. And finally, policies. CJ 300, a twofold strategy is required. Firstly, to reduce crime, and secondly, to respond to it. This will ensure that crime prevention can focus on reducing the social pressures that are considered to be conducive to crime, and that restorative justice can function no longer complicated by incompatible considerations of crime prevention or general deterrence. CJ 301, these two functions will become the responsibility of two new ministries. 1. Department of Crime Prevention. In addition to traditional modes of crime prevention, these departments will also promote social crime prevention. 2. Department of Justice. In addition to responsibility for the judicial system, sentencing policy and practice, these departments will also sponsor services such as assistance to victims. CJ 302. These departments will function at every level of government in accordance with Green Party policies on power being exercised at the lowest appropriate level. Um, there's actually a lot of other points, but I have more. I'm not going to read the whole thing out. It's too extensive, and I've already spent 21 minutes on this. But you get the idea. This basically vindicates my prejudices about the Green Party. Those prejudices have been confirmed. But I wanted to be fair. I wanted to check directly rather than just believe what I would read in, right wing sources. This is directly from their own website. They have made it clear in CJ 206 to ensure that if an offender has to be detained, the purpose of detention is not to punish. This is a party that opposes punishment. So if you're minding your own business and a drunk thug decides to punch you, dislocates your jaw, leaves you with a black eye for no reason, than being in the wrong place at the wrong time, wonderful news. The Green Party doesn't believe that person should be punished because, hey, it's society's fault. It's because they came from a broken home. It's because they had tough surroundings. Therefore, you just have to put up with it. The Greens will tell them that not to be so naughty. That's not very nice. Sit down with a cup of tea and just talk it through. The incredible naivety, the outright stupidity, and frankly, the callousness of their policies really need to be publicly known. So if anyone is considering voting Green and doesn't know what the crime policies are, you might look at these policies and completely disagree with me. You might be as naive as they are. But as someone who was forced to leave my home by gangs, I find this deeply insulting. I also find it incredibly naive because this notion that if you tell criminals that they are the victims, all that certainly doesn't bring about justice. It certainly doesn't teach them anything. All it does is tell them that they are the victims and it's society's fault. And it's just another reason why I think the Greens should be that nowhere near government. Thank goodness they only have one MP. Because their message to victims of crime is that you are on an equilibrium with the person who done that to you. We're going to treat you exactly the same way as the person who done it to you. So they treat crime like it's some sort of dispute, not that it is a case of someone terrorizing another member of society, which is exactly what crime is. Criminals are bullies. The green attitude to bullies is to give them what they want, tell them that they're the victims. They're completely vague on any sort of notion of restorative justice, but they've been very, very clear that they are opposed to any punishment. So shame on the Green Party. And I urge people to consider this before voting for these idiots. And as for, the insults that I'm coming out of, I make no apology for that. Because I believe the far graver issue, if I was standing for election, I probably wouldn't talk like this. But I'm not. I'm not a politician. I'm a private citizen. This is what I think of this. Excuse me, this is what I think of this. And I'm not vilifying every individual Green person. I've known people who are in the Green Party who I've liked as individuals. But as a party, their policies on this are perverse, quite frankly. A party that believes that criminals shouldn't face punishment is not fit to govern. And you can scrutinise Conservative or Labour party policies all you want. There's many areas that need improvement. But at least those parties have some semblance, some notion that there has to at least be a perception of fairness. The Greens don't believe in fairness. That is what is abundantly clear with all these points. No concept of fairness, no concept of balance. Their entire logic is that the actions of criminals is the fault of society, therefore society is responsible. Criminals are not responsible for their own actions. It's pathetic, utterly pathetic. And if I ever was running for public office and I had a Green opponent and I was in an area where crime was a major issue, I will definitely be exposing this. You know, to be honest, I don't think the Greens are ever going to be in government. They're very good as a protest party. They're very good for people who have a kind of very naive utopian vision of the world where everyone gets in a big circle and sings kumbaya. The same party doesn't believe in any controls on immigration. The same party believes in Scottish independence. They're just totally reckless and have no time for them. And as for final point, people might think that, I sometimes got annoyed by the right actually when they use the term do-gooders. This isn't do-gooding. This is the opposite. This is not do-gooding. This isn't morally upright. This isn't humane. This isn't compassionate. This is actually callous towards victims of crime. This is cruel, I would argue. Cruel because it puts victims in a position where they're saying the people who put them there not facing consequences. So to the woman who gets raped, Green policy is to say to the rapist, oh, you shouldn't have done that. They're utterly pathetic.